The Ambitious Radio Network. Conversations with ambitious entrepreneurs and thought leaders. Are you an entrepreneur, startup junkie, or just someone interested in improving their leadership skills? If you're looking to be motivated, inspired, and uncover what it takes to get to the next level, listening to Ambitious Radio will be well worth the investment of your time. We have weekly engaging conversations with today's most influential thought leaders and entrepreneurs as they discuss their successes, failures, tipping points, and other priceless information that you can apply immediately after listening. Now, here's your host, Doug Parker.
All right, welcome back to the Ambitious Radio Network, and today we've got Bobby Klinck with us, and Bobby is a best-selling author and intellectual property attorney who helps entrepreneurs, startups, and innovators harness the power of their intellectual property rights and reduce exposure to lawsuits and brand challenges. He's published 2 books, The Entrepreneur's IP Planning Playbook. I had to say P a bunch of times. I had to say that almost a tongue twister. And The Patent Litigation Primer. Welcome to the show, Bobby. How are you, sir?
Thanks for having me. I'm wonderful. Evidently, I wanted tongue twisters because I think both of them have lots of P's in them.
I'll tell you what, when I was kind of just warming up for the show, I was going through it and I was like, my goodness, blah, 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 blah. I had to get my tongue ready to go. But no, that's good stuff. And I'll tell you, whenever you kind of start with the end in mind and you do some of that planning like you're talking about, it's so important. But let's do this real quick. Before we just dive straight into the business side of things, tell us a little bit about who you are. Tell us about your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in McAllen, Texas, which I should put you on the spot and see if you know where that is.
McAllen, Texas. It is in like the valley, right? You're down there way, way south, right?
It is. So I was born and raised 5 miles from the Mexican border and about 50 miles from the coast. So that's where I spent my formative years, the first 18 years of my life. My family was from down there, both my mother's side and father's side. My mother's side had been down there longer. My father's side moved down there, I guess, was my grandparents who did. So I was born and raised there, then went to the University of Texas, spent my college years there before moving out of the state of Texas when I was 21. And I have been back since, but been a lot of different places since then. I currently live in Washington, D.C.
Very good, very good. Now, so let me ask you this. So you said you're from McAllen. Now, do you speak Spanish?
Not as much as I should. Okay. I understand more than I can speak. I took it in high school. I took it in college, but since then, unfortunately, I just haven't been places where you're speaking it regularly. And it's one of those things. It's a muscle that if you don't actually keep practicing, you lose it. And so I've definitely lost it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of funny that you say that. A really good friend of mine and a mentor of mine that was with Whataburger from 1955 to 1993. And for those that are listening that for whatever reason don't know about Whataburger, it's a Texas iconic company. And he was with Whataburger from 1955 to 1993. His name is Alan Stoner, and he is he's from Ireland, but he came to Corpus Christi in 55 and ran a restaurant there in McAllen. Like there was 3 Whataburgers when he came to town, and so he ran one of those and worked with the family to get that all up and running to what it is today. So, yeah, very very good stuff. Now, so let's just kind of talk about growing up. You said you went to UT, University of Texas, and ultimately became an attorney. So let's talk about obstacles in life. Has everything just been sunshine and rainbows for you, or have you ever had to overcome anything that's been a little difficult?
Well, no, everything hasn't been sunshine and rainbows. I doubt anybody is. I've had a lot of great things come my way, and I have had a lot of sunshine and rainbows. I was lucky to be born to, a couple of parents who were wonderful parents. My mother was a math teacher. My dad owned a chain of drugstores down in the Rio Grande Valley. So it was a good family, a family where I was raised right. I was raised with education in mind. My dad was not so happy that I became an attorney because he's a business person who's had to deal with attorneys in some not so great situations, I'm sure. But so they had both actually gone to the University of Texas. So I started going to Texas football games when I was maybe 3 years old, spent pretty much my whole childhood going there, and then went there. And I went to college knowing already that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I planned to do a double major in mechanical engineering and plan to honors, which is kind of an honors humanities program. So I did one semester of that, and then realized that was going to mean 5 years of college with 4 years of summer school. And I wanted to be a lawyer, so I said, why am I going to do that? So I actually changed and did kind of a double major within humanities and liberal arts, and ended up spending 3 years there and 2 summers before going on to law school. And I went to Harvard Law School in Boston, outside of Cambridge, and that was quite an eye-opening experience. I was a Texas boy, 21 years old at the time. Literally, I graduated college 3 weeks after I turned 21, and then went straight to law school up in Boston. And have you seen the movie Legally Blonde?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, most of that movie is complete fiction, but there's one part that rings true. If you remember that movie, when she first gets to Harvard Law School, she's sitting in this small group of people introducing themselves and talking about what they had done. And one has a PhD, and the other one has a master's, and someone else had spent 4 years doing some amazing thing. That's true. So I was the boring person when I went to law school, and it was quite an eye-opening experience, because it was the first time I don't want to say the underdog, but I was not kind of the person who was automatically at the top. And so that was an interesting experience. And this is a roundabout way of answering your question of challenges. The biggest challenge that I faced during that period of my life was when I was about to start my 3rd and final year at law school. My father and my uncle were in a plane crash right outside of San Antonio. They had their own plane and were personal pilots. And they were both severely burned and taken to the Brooke Army Medical Center, which was it's in San Antonio. They have one of the premier burn units. And I got a call. It was late, about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I answered the phone, and the first words that came through were, "They're okay." And as you can imagine, that's never a good beginning to a conversation. But those were the first words. I then got a call a couple of hours later from my brother, who was the first person I think who had actually gotten to the facility, because he lived in Austin at the time. And the report I got from him was that my uncle was unlikely to make it through the night. So I jumped on a plane the next day, got down to San Antonio, and I spent the next, I think, 2 months there. My dad ultimately did pull through. He was burned over, I think it was 45% of his body, and he was 50-something years old at the time. And if you talk to folks in burn units, they'll tell you that your chance of survival is you take your age, add the percentage of your body that you're burned on, and then subtract that from 100, and that tells you your chance. He had about a 2% chance of survival, but he made it through. But it meant I spent that first semester, my 3rd year in law school, effectively not in school. I was having to do everything from afar. I was also at the time in a very elite competition, what's called moot court, where you do these mock appellate arguments before actual judges. And the one at Harvard is one of the most prestigious. It's all internal. And we were finalists that year. And I was one of the people who'd be giving the argument, but also had to write briefs. So I was gone. I flew back basically right in time to work with my team to write our brief. Then I flew back down to Texas. And then flew back, I don't know, maybe a week before the argument, and participated in that. So that semester was the first time in my life that I really faced unbelievable challenges of having to try to balance a bunch of different aspects: personal life, family life, along with my professional life, which at the time was being a student. And that shaped my understanding of how you have to work in life, and how you have to be able to balance those things throughout your life. So that was an eye-opening semester, an eye-opening experience, and it has really shaped the person I am today.
Sure. And that's some pretty heavy stuff. And I bring that up because sometimes, I know when I was looking through the kind of interview notes, if you will, and kind of looking, I say, I'm a guy from Harvard. That's pretty cool. And, when you're talking about how, you had kind of, people don't get into Harvard because they've sloughed off their whole life. They're most of the time they're pretty talented, pretty sharp people, and you're going somewhere where it's a different environment than you've ever been in before, because everybody is as good as you are, or most are, as it were. And so, my daughter just recently went off to college a couple years back, and that was one of the things that we looked at. It was from an athletic standpoint, but we looked at some of the elite athletic programs, and she could have gotten into them, but one of the coaches was like, look, she'll get on the track and run and have fun, but she probably won't be real competitive. And most of the time, she's probably going to get her doors blown off. And then the D2 schools where she'll get to compete and do this, that, and the other. And the D3 schools were drooling over getting her. And, it's kind of like this, where do you go? But it was kind of a consideration like that. She had always been pretty good everywhere she had gone. And, it was a real consideration, because there's a lot of kids, from what I hear, they go to these places like Harvard or Yale or these Ivy League type schools, and they get there, and they don't fare as well as you did. They're like, I'm not a superstar anymore, I'm average, and they don't know how to take that. So can you just elaborate a little bit on kind of what that was like, that feeling of, because you probably go there thinking that, your whole life has been this way, why would it not be that way at the next level? Do you ever have anything that you remember that's like, whoa, this is not what I thought it was going to be?
Well, see, actually, my experience was the opposite. My experience was going up there, although I'm someone who tends to have self-confidence, and my high school friends would laugh at that and say I have a big head, but I've never doubted myself. But going to Harvard, I have to admit, I thought, wow, I'm going to Harvard. And again, I was a guy, I had grown up, I went to public schools my whole life, went to the University of Texas, graduated with honors at the University of Texas, but I didn't have this prestigious background. I hadn't gone to the prep schools or any of those things. And so I had this view of mine that that's what Harvard was, and I was a bit nervous. But candidly, after I was there for about a week, it just became school again, and I felt in my element. Luckily, I took to law, and I took to the way that law is taught, and so I did well, and I felt confident the whole time. It also helped that in high school, I had been in various events that required public speaking. I was in debate, had won the state debate championship in high school. I was in mock trial, which is basically you pretending to do a trial of criminal or civil case. And then there was another program that my high school did that's basically a competition where you learn about the Constitution and then do these mock Senate panels about it. So I had done all of that in high school, so I felt very comfortable in myself in doing those things. So I think because of that, I felt comfortable once I got there, and it was just, hey, let's analyze a problem and let's talk about it. And that's really what you do in law school, and it's as much about self-confidence and being comfortable, being put on the spot as anything else. And so I really did feel comfortable from the get-go. I mean, looking back, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I was a law school classmate with Senator Tom Cotton, for example. So, I have a lot of amazing people that were around me. The Castro brothers, they were, I think, a year ahead of me or 2 years ahead of me. But again, I was with people like that who are now, people that everybody knows who are in public service. And it was amazing, but it really was just school. And so it quickly became that, and it was a wonderful experience that way.
Cool. So we'll jump into a couple more, not necessarily personal questions, but before we just dive into business in the next segment, let's talk about, favorite books maybe that either you've gifted to people or just one of the books that you're currently going through that you really like.
Well, I would say the book that I like to point out to people is Living Forward, which is about creating a life plan. It's about understanding and remembering, in a sense, that we work not to work, and to understand what our priorities are. And I think it's especially important for entrepreneurs and business people to keep that in mind, because too often we just get so focused on the next project, the next accomplishment, the next milestone, without remembering. And again, I'm married with a 3-year-old daughter right now. I work, but that's not my first priority. My first priority is my family. And so understanding that and having a plan that actually reminds me of that is important. And that's what the book teaches you to do, is to go about kind of creating the different categories and how you want to be remembered, and then ranking them in a sense, but also then setting your goals for each one of those categories. So I think it's an important book that helps people understand how to really plan their lives, not just their businesses.
Sure. And you've had some success. There's no question about it. And you've got self-confidence, and I'm saying that in a very positive way, because there's a lot of people that they just don't have self-confidence, and they really are perfectly capable of getting anything done needs to get done, but they don't have that. But what would you say is one of the personal habits that's most contributed to your success?
I think the most important personal habit that I have that contributes to my success is, well, currently I would say it's daily meditation. And I think that's really important given the profession I'm in, because I'm in a profession where much of my day is spent fighting with other people. And so, being centered and being calm is important in that, or I probably would have burned out. I probably would lose it if I didn't do that. So I think right now that is an important, one of my most important habits. But more broadly, I would say having an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. And it doesn't have to be education in the sense of going and taking university courses or reading heavy textbooks or anything like that, but always wanting to learn and to learn a new skill. And when I became an entrepreneur, for example, it was learning about sales and marketing and things that most lawyers don't know anything about. And so I think that has been a big part of my success as well.
Got it. Makes perfect sense there. And we're going to get a little bit more, because I want to know about that daily meditation in the last segment when we talk about recharging and those kind of things, because I hear that from a lot of successful people. I'm not great at it, but I do hear about it a lot. Now, I want to get some more information, and after we hear a brief word from our sponsors, we'll dive into that just a little bit more. And listeners, if you like what you're hearing, if you maybe missed the title of a book or one of those kind of things, you can always go back and reference the show notes, and you can just type in Bobby and search for him, and it'll definitely pull up his page, and we'll have all that on there. Tune in after a brief word from our sponsors when we're talking more with Bobby Klinck about his career pursuits, his experience of becoming an ambitious entrepreneur, and how he helps others with their careers as well, right here on the Ambitious Radio Network. Hello, this is Doug Parker, and I have been working with loan officers for over 2 decades. And if you're looking for a new mortgage, I want to introduce you to Jeff Janash. He's with Town Square Mortgage. This guy's got programs for every situation, whether you're self-employed, you need down payment assistance, a cash-out refinance for debt consolidation. They can even do jumbo loans with 10% down. Rates are very competitive. Their service exceeds expectations. They're 2-time 5-star professional award winner. Very quick turnarounds. They can actually get loans closed in 3 weeks. A great program to be part of if you want to get in, get out, don't want to play a bunch of games. These guys are here local and can take really good care of you. I've known Jeff for many, many years, and he's actually available after hours. Give Jeff Janash a call, 972-292-7599, or you can go to tsmlending.com. That's tsmlending.com. T like town, S for square, M for mortgage, lending.com. Town Square Mortgage, 17300 Dallas Parkway, Suite 1030, Dallas, Texas, 75248. NMLS ID 169224. All right, we're back on the Ambitious Radio Network, and we've got Bobby Klinck, and we're going to talk a little bit about his professional, adventures. We talked about he went to school at Harvard. He's an attorney. He's an entrepreneur. He's written a couple of different books, and so let's talk a little bit. I mean, how do you derive the majority of your income right now? What's the focus of your business?
My business right now comes from, and almost all of the revenue comes from clients that I serve, and I do client service in a couple of different ways, or a couple of different focuses, I should say. Part of it is advising startups, small businesses, entrepreneurs on how to create an intellectual property plan, basically how to create a strategy for their business, to make sure they're protecting their their valuable assets, but also to make sure they're minimizing the risk that they're going to get sued by somebody else. The other part of my business is representing clients in lawsuits involving intellectual property. Those are very consuming. I think I mentioned before the break about being in fights with people, and so that's where I'm in fights with people all day, every day. So that's where I get my revenue currently.
Okay, so let's talk about a real situation. Somebody goes out, they're an entrepreneur, and let's just say they really are truly an honest individual. They're not trying to rip anybody off. They had something pop in their head that they thought was a cool idea, and they just kind of run with it. Can you give us a real-time example of something that seems innocent enough? You're not dealing with somebody that's a rip-off artist, but then how, because they didn't prepare properly, how they kind of got stepped into, or how they stepped into a bear trap on that?
Yeah, sure can. The biggest mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make and businesses make relates to trademark issues. And if you think about it, it's not surprising this happens. To give you a little bit of background in case your listeners aren't lawyers, which I suspect they're not, a trademark is a type of intellectual property that defines the source of a good or service. So the Coca-Cola name is a trademark, for example. It's basically a name, a logo, a slogan, anything that essentially says, hey, this product or service is coming from this company or this provider. And I would suggest to any entrepreneur, you should trademark your name and you should get a federal trademark. It's relatively inexpensive. It'll cost you probably about $500 between getting someone to file it for you and actually paying the fee. So that's not an expensive endeavor, but that's not the big mistake, because you actually get trademark rights through common law. So if you're in the Dallas area and you start using a name and you're actually conducting business under that name, you start to get some common law rights to use that name. The problem that most people, or the mistake most people make, is they don't go through the steps of making sure they can actually use the name. And I'll give you a real world example from where I am in the Washington, D.C. area. I happen to be a craft beer nerd. I brew beer for fun. And so I follow the craft beer industry around here. Well, the first craft brewery here in D.C. was D.C. Brau. And they had, I think, they've always had 3 flagship beers. One of them is called The Citizen. And some years later, let's say 4 or 5 years after that brewery was founded, another small startup brewery was being founded about 5 miles away, just in a suburb, the first suburb out in Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. And they named their brewery Citizen Brewing Company. And how it escaped them that DC Brau was not going to like them using a name that they were using in commerce escapes me, but they didn't. And it actually led to a small dispute. It got resolved without any litigation or any lawsuits, but they had already gone public with the name. Then they got a letter from DC Brau's attorneys, and so they had to change their name to Denizen Brewing, so it actually worked out without too much difficulty. But they had definitely spent some time, spent some money in developing their name and developing their brand, and then had to change it. And I see that over and over and over again. So you need to check and make sure you can use the name. That's an example where I don't know. I think they just didn't think about the issue, but you should do a couple of simple things. One, go to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's website, and you can run a search to see if anyone has actually registered your name. But beyond that, and this is a simple one, go onto Google, type in the name and see if anybody else is using it. If no one else is using it, great, use it, you're fine. If someone else is, then you might need to talk to a lawyer, or maybe, don't pay someone like me money, just come up with another name. But that's the biggest error I see people make over and over again.
And that's a good one, because when, as just a lay person, I look at that and I think, that's not even the same thing. I mean, you got one of them that their company name is something to do with the Citizen. Another one that one of their beers is called Citizen, and they just happen to both be in the beer business. But I guess there's enough similarity to where it kind of creates an issue.
Well, and here's the thing. Honestly, I don't know who would have won if they would have fought it out. But the fact is, if you're a startup or a small new business, you can't afford a fight. Well, and so you're not going to be in a position to actually be able to fight it. So you need to think about these things to avoid a fight.
I'll tell you who would have won the fight. The attorneys, because they always get paid on both sides. Now, I'm just giving you a hard time because you're an attorney, but no, seriously though, I think you're right there, because it's sometimes it's easier just to kind of stop the bleeding and do something different, but potentially they could have prevented that exposure from the beginning if they had jumped in there and done that. Now, let's dive in also, and let's talk about, in business, failure. We talked about, going to Harvard and some of the obstacles and some of the things personally. Do you have a favorite failure, something that you learned massively from over the years, whether it was you personally or one of your clients?
I do, and I learned it personally. And let me give you some backstory to give you a sense of how I got there. Well, when I came out of law school after working for a judge for a year, I worked at big law firms, or bigger law firms that represented bigger clients, including, as a side note, because this may be of interest to listeners these days, one of my mentors at one of those firms was Neil Gorsuch, now known as Judge Gorsuch, maybe soon to be known as Justice Gorsuch. So I had that pleasure of working for him, but I'd worked at these big law firms. And then I kind of chafed because I knew something wasn't quite right for me there. I thought I wanted more experience, more tasks. I learned later it was actually the entrepreneurial spirit. I wanted more control over my destiny, et cetera. But at the time, I thought I just wanted to be the one who got to stand up and do things and make arguments. So then I from there went and became a federal prosecutor down in Fort Worth, Texas, where I spent 3 years. Wonderful experience. Got to get up every day in court, argue, got to get up repeatedly and say, my name is Robert Klinck. I represent the United States of America. It's a pretty good experience. As I was coming out of that job, though, I was coming back to Washington, D.C., and I had to decide what to do. And the firm where I had been before, which is a bigger firm, is about a 50 or 60 person firm, represented clients, big clients and big matters. They offered for me to go back, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to go that route. So I also looked around, and I found a small firm. At the time, it was 3 lawyers, 2 partners, and a woman is called of counsel, which just meant she kind of worked on an as-needed basis. I interviewed with them. It was entrepreneurial. It was everything I wanted, and it sounded great. I was going to get great experience, but also I was going to help build the thing up. The firm had only been around a couple of years. And so I joined, I was called a partner, but I was not actually a partner. I was not in the partnership agreement. I was under a different agreement. I had this letter that essentially said I would get a certain salary, but I understood I'd only get paid when the firm had money, and I understood the firm didn't have money at the time, didn't have regular cash flow. So that was the only agreement we ever signed. And then I stayed there for about 4 years, and we operated under this. It was a pretty equitable sharing. I had no complaints. They treated me fairly. The 2 partners who'd been there a little longer, they got a little bit more than me, but not a lot. But we hadn't yet had any big, huge hits, and we had some cases that might go that way. But also during lean years, it was lean for me. So then fast forward, I guess I'd been there. At the time, I'd been there about 3.5 years, and my wife got pregnant. And I said, we need to actually formalize this. I need to become part of the partnership agreement. Because the problem was I was in the situation where, if we had a bad year, I could make nothing. And if we had this huge year, I wasn't entitled to anything other than this, whatever the salary was. And so I wanted to formalize it. Well, that was in the summer, and I kind of raised it with him. I figured we'd formalize it around the end of the year because just for tax purposes, et cetera, it'd be easier if it was around year end. So it kind of didn't get discussed much until the end of the year. We talked about it briefly then, didn't come to much resolution. And one of the partners actually didn't live in town. He lived somewhere else. He was in town in late February for something unrelated. And I was taking him to the airport. And as we were walking out of the office to my car, he brought up the subject and we started talking. And sitting here today, I don't even remember what the offer was, but the offer that was made to me, it kind of made my jaw hit the ground at the time because I didn't think it was fair, whatever percentage it was that they were going to give me. And also I'd been the administrative partner for the last year, so I knew what our revenue was, so I could translate it in my mind to what it would have meant. And it would have been a significant pay cut and all these other issues. And so it didn't sit well with me. I dropped him off the airport. We talked along the way. We talked about those issues. Called my wife. right after he got out of the car, she could tell I was not in a good place, said, I need you to come home right now, to give me an excuse to not go back to the office because it was a Friday. And so I went home, and I was stewing about it that night. And the next morning I woke up, and by the way, I actually registered registered the domain name that night and filed for a corporation that night that ultimately became my company, because I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So the next morning I emailed my two partners, and I said, look, sitting well, I think we should talk rather than just letting me stew. And we couldn't set up a time that day, but we set up a time on the following day, Sunday. We got on that phone call, and it ended up being a very painful phone call that caused all kinds of problems, because the difficulty is, at that point, each side was trying to explain their value, and some of it bled over to why the other people were not as valuable. And there were, some comments made that were not helpful, that didn't lead to things, to the point that when I got off that phone call, holding my, at the time, 2-month-old baby, I told my wife and my brother-in-law, who was at my house, let's go to my office. I need to get my stuff. So we literally went to my office that night, packed up all my personal belongings, and I left my key because I knew it was over. And it's unbelievably painful even now when I talk about it, because one of those partners, and we have repaired things now years later, but one of those partners, to give you a sense, literally flew through Hurricane Sandy to get to my wedding in the Bahamas. And then we have this situation that essentially fractured our relationship. And this is something I see entrepreneurs do over and over and over again. They don't get things in writing. And so that's why one of the first pieces of advice I give to entrepreneurs is get it in writing. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. If my partners and I had a written agreement at the beginning about how I would ultimately become a partner in the partnership agreement, et cetera, we would have been on the same page. There wouldn't have been any hurt feelings. But because we didn't, we had to try to have that negotiation at a time when it's not helpful to have that negotiation. And that happens to business people every day of the week. And I see it, and it never ends well. So, the lesson I learned is always, especially with a partnership agreement or an employment agreement, get it in writing and have the details set out in writing from the get-go.
And just to add a little bit to that, the reality is that whenever you're talking about something, you can say one thing and leave thinking two different things, even though it was agreed upon, on a handshake or whatever. And one of the things that I've done over the years is, hey, let's at least, it doesn't have to be a big formal, attorney reviewed agreement necessarily. Sometimes there's obviously situations for that, but, hey, put the basics down, and then that way you can leave there and both people can say, yep, that's what I understood it to mean. Yep, that's what I understood it to mean. And at least there's more details and context. And if you do have to, later on down the road, if there's a conflict, you can look at it and at least there's something to base it on, as opposed to what you feel like you heard from 3 or 4 years ago. And then the emotion, as you talked about, because times change and people have different feelings. They may have thought a certain way, or you may have thought a certain way all those years back, but something soured, and then, or whatever the case is, and it really tears things up whenever those things happen. Let me ask you one more quick question, and that doesn't have to be a quick answer, but just a quick question. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, just one thing at any time in your life, what would you tell yourself, and kind of at what point in your life would you have told yourself that?
Well, so I would go back to when I was first becoming a lawyer, and I'm going to give 2 pieces of advice, not one.
Okay.
The first piece of advice I would say is you have to know your why. That was a big part of my problem, is it took me many years as a lawyer before I found what my actual purpose was and what I wanted to be doing. And once I did discover it, it was this eureka moment, and it fundamentally changed how I felt about being a lawyer, et cetera. So that's the one big, the first piece I would say. And again, that's for business people. You've heard that a million times, start with why. You have to do that. the next piece of advice I would have given myself is that I would have told myself that I always had to be in charge of my own career. Even when I was working at another company, when I was working for someone else, I should have always acted under the assumption that I had to build my own career, and I was always an entrepreneur. I always had to make my own way in business and build my own business. Too many people, and especially lawyers who work at big firms, which is how I started, there's almost this false safety that you don't have to be creating your own business because you've got a paycheck coming in. Well, if you're not building a business, and if you're not actually building clients in any kind of service industry, you're going to be the first one to go if times get tough. So you always have to be building a business, regardless of whether you're at a company as an employee or running your own business. You've got to be taking charge of your own life.
That's really, really great advice. And like I said, no matter what position you're in, that's one of the things, whether I've been through a couple of cycles of the economy in my career, and probably, I don't know, it was maybe in the 90s, my wife asked me at one of the downturns, she was like, are you worried? I'm like, I'm really not worried. I mean, the cream always rises to the top. I'll just outwork everybody, and I'm in a sales type environment. So as long as there's somebody selling something and making money doing it, then I promise you I'm going to be in the competition. So at the end of the day, that's something that really, resonates, where you've got to be out there making things happen. Always operate like you're an entrepreneur. And if this, Zig Ziglar was a mentor of mine. I've said it a million times here on the show, but Zig, used to say that if you do more than what you get paid for, eventually you get paid more for what you do. And, that's really kind of what you're saying there is, hey, do what you're supposed to be doing. Make sure that you're bringing revenue in, and the revenue generators are typically the last to get cut. It's the administrative or the expense line item people that get cut, not necessarily the ones that are bringing the cash in. So that's great information for our ambitious listeners. And guys, if you're liking what you're hearing, you can subscribe by texting the word ambitious to 69922. That's 69922. Standard messaging rates do apply, so see the website for more details. Next, we're going to be talking more to Bobby about the ambitious things that really he's doing now and what's next for him, because he is an attorney but is also an entrepreneur. Talking about that right here on the Ambitious Radio Network.
Another RepairMyCreditNow.com story.
It's a day this family had dreamed of for quite some time. They were finally getting that brand new SUV. The salesperson at the auto dealership gave them the keys and told them to take it for the weekend. He'd prepared the documents and called them Monday morning. The kids had already installed the headrest DVD when the phone rang. Seems there was a problem with their credit they were unaware of. They'd have to return the SUV to the dealership immediately. Embarrassing, to say the least.
www.repairmycreditnow.com.
Hello, this is Doug Parker with RepairMyCreditNow.com. Do you have less than perfect credit, a repo, maybe some late payments, a collection account? Are they being reported accurately? Studies show that over 70% of Americans have inaccuracies on their credit reports. Where do you fit in? Go to RepairMyCreditNow.com for your free credit report evaluation. And remember, your credit is your future. If you want to get started now, log on now. RepairMyCreditNow.com.
RepairMyCreditNow.com. www.repairmycreditnow.com.
All right, we're back on the Ambitious Radio Network, and we've got Bobby Klinck with us today. And I'll tell you what, I'm loving learning about the things that they're fundamentals. There's nothing I'm hearing that's like, oh my goodness, that's an aha moment. It's very fundamental, but so many people just don't do it, and it can be very, very expensive if you don't, do the things you're supposed to do. So make sure, you get an attorney, you review things, you don't go out there and use other people's intellectual property, but then also that you protect yours. But let's talk, Bobby, a little bit about what's next for you. I mean, I know you've written a couple books, and is that something where you enjoy writing, or was it just kind of something that came naturally to you? How did you write a couple books, and are you planning on writing more?
Well, so as a lawyer, I spend so most people have a glamorized view of what lawyers do. Most of what I do is I read, I think, and I write, and that's just the nature of the business. So writing does, in some sense, come naturally to me now. I mean, it took a while. It wasn't until college and law school, I guess, where it really became natural. Writing books, it started, I was just going to write this short little book about patent litigation. And I say a book, it wasn't going to be a book. It was going to be like a pamphlet that I could give my clients and prospective clients to help them understand the process, because I've always found that an educated client is a much better client. So that was what started. And I don't know what I had in mind with how many pages it would be, but the problem is it's such a complicated or such a serious topic that it just required a lot of work, and it required a lot of writing. And so I kept writing, and it ended up being about 200 pages long. So I published it as a book rather than as a pamphlet. So that was the first book. The second book was much more focused and having a thought very specifically about what I was doing and trying to help the marketplace, not just my clients. My goal was to create a shorter book that entrepreneurs could use, pick up, and understand, do what's called issue spotting, in a sense, see what are the issues they need to be thinking about with respect to their intellectual property, and are they doing it or not, and then give them an overview of how they would go about creating a plan or a strategy to handle these issues. So that's the Entrepreneur's IP Planning Playbook. It's about 75 pages long. It's meant to be something to give you an idea of what you need to be thinking about and getting you there. So that was the idea for that. I give both of the books away. People can buy them on Amazon, but I also give them PDFs for free on my website if anybody will give me their email address, because my goal is to get people educated. I'm never going to make money selling intellectual property books. I know that much. That's not a cash cow. I have some other projects. I'm working on a bigger, more ambitious book about intellectual property strategy that would kind of be, I don't want to call it a Bible, but a much bigger tome that would help people understand things and understand all of the different issues and the value. But I'm also working on some non-written work. I'm working on putting together an online course that people can take, that the idea being for folks who can't afford or don't want to afford maybe hiring a lawyer to do it, they can at least take an online course, get the information, get some forms, get the paperwork they're going to need to actually do this themselves.
Very good. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, this is a little bit of a curveball, so I know that asking it, and if you don't have the answer real quick, not the end of the world, but if you could do a TED Talk or maybe even just present to a group of young folks or just young entrepreneurs, but it's not to do with necessarily your expertise as an IP attorney, do you have anything that you really are passionate about that you'd like to talk to folks about?
Well, I think it wouldn't be specifically about IP, but it would be the theme that I try to teach people generally, which is that a couple of hours of planning up front can avoid months of pain later on. And so I stress that in my business, but also in other parts of my life. And so I think that's the message that I would give, and whether it's a TED Talk or anything else, that you have to make the commitment to do the planning up front, and it can be hard because we're all busy. And for me, taking 3-4 hours out of my week is tough. But I can either take 3 or 4 hours out of my week now, or I risk having to spend months and suffer a lot of pain and suffering a couple of months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. So that's the message I would give to folks.
Okay, and let me ask this. So, for example, obviously we use the scenario of a name and it being a business name that was similar to someone else's, and it kind of ruffled some feathers, and they ultimately changed it. But are there any practical things that are maybe not business related that you would apply that to as well?
I would apply it to your life. So again, I think I mentioned before, living forward and creating a life plan. And the process is not easy. To create a life plan, you really have to dedicate at least a whole day sometime to really do it. But it helps you recenter and know what you're doing in life. And so again, especially for business people, it can be so easy to start taking things for granted in our personal lives and to forget about the things we really care about and to lose our way. I've had times where I got too focused on the next marketing, the next sales, the next project, and I have unquestionably not been a good husband as a result. And so taking the time to create a plan for your life. Forget your business. If you do it right now, and again, it can be simple things. It can be, sending a text message to my wife that tells her how much I love her or why I love her and why I appreciate her. Those kinds of things that take very little time, but you have to remember to do it. If you do it consistently now, I can't guarantee, obviously, that we're not going to have a fight later, but it's going to make it much less likely that we're going to, become estranged and then try to have to rekindle a relationship in a much more significant way later. So that's another example of it. Just, every day, hit your singles. Don't try to hit home runs every day. I think that will help you as well.
Sure. And, I was actually at church the other day, and our pastor was talking about the reality is people talk about work-life balance, and it's not that it's not possible, but it's very difficult because you need to give 100% to your family, but you need to give 100% to your job, and that's 200%. It doesn't work that way. So if you're giving all the time and attention to your family that you probably technically need to, your work is going to be upset with you. If you give all of your time and effort to your work, your family's going to be upset with you. So little things like you said, it's a practical, maybe sending a little text, maybe balancing it out in that, hey, 2 nights a week or whatever, I'm going to be late. And you plan for it, but 2 or 3 nights a week, I'm going to be home at whatever time for dinner, so that there's at least a plan so that you can make some sacrifices and you're giving 100% in that time frame while you're doing it, and then you can unplug and do some of the other stuff, and when it's not an emergency, if you will. Because I like you, and not proud of it at all. I mean, I work 80, 90 hours a week right now, and it's way too much. But it's a cycle of life that I'm doing, and there was a time where I've never worked less than 60 hours a week. And that's too much, but it's just I guess just how I roll, and so some people are better at it than others. I don't know. When I hear, honestly, until recently, when I started listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast, when I heard the 4-hour work week, I never even wanted to read the book. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life. Now that I know who he is and what he's all about, it's not even about working 4 hours a week, but I thought, I'm not even going to read that stupid book because that's crazy. You cannot get a job done in 4 hours. I can't get a job done in 40. But but anyway, it's interesting how those things happen. And so let's talk about mentoring and people that you kind of look to. I mean, obviously you've been around some very influential individuals over your life. You've talked about a couple of them, but is there anyone currently that you're following or that's mentoring you? And if so, who are they and why?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say there's no one that's mentoring me presently, but I do follow a lot of people, and I follow people strangely who have not, and I say it's not strange. I don't follow lawyers. That was one of the mistakes I made early on, and it's one of the mistakes that way too many lawyers make. So many lawyers try to just talk to other lawyers and learn from other lawyers, which that's great. That'll help you understand your technical skills. But I follow and I try to learn from entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurship podcasts that are out there. There's a bunch of them that obviously people would know about. One of the first ones that really got me was EO Fire with John Lee Dumas, just because it's this great opportunity to listen to people every day, kind of going through the same questions and providing you insights on how you can make your life better. So I listen to that pretty consistently. I listen to Entree Leadership podcast. Anytime I find myself spending too much money, I will listen to the Dave Ramsey podcast to bring myself back down to life. That's not really business, but so I listen to people like that because that's the grounding I need. That's the information I need. And so that's where I focus my efforts right now.
It's funny that you mentioned those two, because when I first started doing this show, I was like, I really want to do something with a podcast as well and keep it, there's the radio part of it, and then I want to kind of have an uncut, continued version. And those were two, the podcast, the Entree Leadership, which is part of Dave Ramsey's organization, and then OJLD, the Entrepreneur on Fire. I listen to that, and it's every single day. It's lots of great information, and I did some of the modeling for what we're doing based on those shows, and so that was it's a small world how these things kind of keep coming around full circle. So very, very good information and ambitious times here. I mean, after we hear another brief word from our sponsors, we've got one more segment with Bobby, and I can't wait to hear what he does to recharge his ambitious body, mind, and spirit right here on the Ambitious Radio Network. Are you tired of paying too much for electricity from the former monopolies and getting terrible customer service? Do you really even know how much you're paying per kilowatt? Sometimes they quote you a lower rate, but then add back in the delivery charge. Ugh, how frustrating. Go to electricity.guru, that's right, .guru, for your free analysis. Who knows, with just a few referrals, you could actually earn free electricity. If you're tired of paying outrageous electricity bills, do something about it. Would you like to get a significant discount or even get free electricity? Go to electricity.guru and compare our rates to what you're currently paying. Many of our clients are saving anywhere from 15 to 20%. We also have a referral program that allows you to earn free electricity. Yes, free electricity. And you cannot beat free cents per kilowatt. Award-winning service, competitive rates, and low deposits, if even required. Go to electricity.guru for more details. That's electricity.guru. We offer free energy credits to customers who refer and activate 15 or more qualified customers to our electricity service and are not passed due on their bill. To get your free energy credit, your customers must be referred through the free customer gathering website. See electricity.guru for more details. All right, today we're talking to Bobby Klinck. He's a successful author. He's working on all kinds of stuff. He's an entrepreneur. He's an attorney. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I tell you what, so now is a segment where it's not so much business related. It's all the things that business takes out of you. How do you put it back into your life? So how is it that you recharge your ambitious body, mind, and spirit? Are there things that you do? I know you talked a little bit about the meditation, in the first segment. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what exactly you do?
Yeah, so I meditate daily. I use the Calm app. That just is what I happen to choose when I first started meditation. It's got some various day courses that'll help you kind of understand it, but then they come out with a new daily meditation every day, which is 10 minutes. And a lot of people, I think, have a false idea about what meditation is. They think that to meditate properly, you have to sit there and literally not have any thoughts go through your mind. And that's fundamentally not what meditation is. Meditation is about trying to calm your thoughts and center yourself, but it's also about noticing your thoughts and then letting them go rather than sitting there and fixating on them. So that's what I do. I tend to do about 20 minutes every morning. There's the 10-minute daily meditation, and then I will pick one of the others. Some are called a body scan, where you focus on various parts of your body and really just focusing on, well, what am I feeling in that part of my body? And then there are various other ones that I'll do as well. But the point is just to start with something that calms me and keeps me in a centered place. So that's why I do meditation. It's a daily habit, and it's a daily practice, really. It's not a habit. It's every day you're practicing. And as you do it, it gets easier and easier, I would say. When you first start, it can be hard to sit still for 5 minutes. And you blame yourself for thinking. And as you do it, you get to the point that it's easier and easier to let things go and to focus on your breathing and to just sit there in quiet restfulness. So that's my biggest daily habit. There are other things I do. I think I mentioned that I'm a bit of a beer nerd. I actually brew my own beer. So that's one of the things I do to recharge on the weekends when I have time. And so that's an enjoyable hobby, I guess, that I have. Other than that, it's mainly spending time with my wife, my daughter, and then I've got 2 dogs that keep me quite busy.
Very good. Now, so brewing beer, I know nothing at all about it, but in just a little blip, I mean, what does it take to brew beer?
Well, so, I mean, you can brew beer pretty easily if you want to start with kits, and they have syrups and things like that. But what I do, you start from the grain. You basically create a recipe, and a lot of people just will use other people's recipes, but I've always really created my own. And it's not that I'm doing anything crazy or wacky or out of the ordinary. I'm actually just very European in my style of beer. My ancestors are German, and not surprisingly, my beer taste is as well. I tend to brew very much to that style, where it's about creating a very balanced beer that's very drinkable. But so I start with the grain. You create a recipe, just like anything else. There's various kinds of grain and various levels of roast which affect the flavor, and you create a mixture of that. You do what's called you basically steep it in warm water or hot water to get the starches to convert to sugars. Then you boil it with the hops. You cool it down. You throw in yeast. The yeast does all the work, and 2 or 3 weeks later, you have beer that just has to be carbonated. So that's the process in a nutshell.
Interesting. Very interesting. I was wondering, I hear about these people making beer and these different things, and I was wondering, what in the world? How are they doing it? So that gives a little bit of an insight. Now, when it comes to like your daily mode of operation, I mean, what time do you go to bed? What time do you get up? How much sleep does it take for you to operate?
I get about 7 hours a day of sleep. I try to get to bed about 9:30, and then I get up about 4:30. And I get up that early because my daughter tends to get up at about 7, and so I've got a lot of things I want to check off and get done before then. Meditation. The only way I'll get a workout in is if I do it in the morning. But then I also try to do the non-sexy parts of being a business owner, the mundane marketing tasks and things like that are easy to let go. I try to get all that done before my daughter wakes up in the morning, so that it's kind of been checked off of my to-do list.
Very good. Now, let me ask you this. When you first wake up, are you one of those kind of guys that like looks at your phone and looks at the emails that are in the queue, or do you put that aside until you get, maybe past 7 o'clock when your daughter wakes up?
Well, I mean, luckily I don't have a lot of, right now at least, I'm not at a place where I tend to be getting a lot of really late night emails. In my work, sometimes I do. And if I have a case against folks out in California on the other side, they will often be sending me things late, and often after I've gone to bed. But, normally I don't have anything that's crucial that comes in overnight, so I just let it sit. I might take a look and see what it is, but I rarely do anything about it. Again, I meditate, I get my workout in, and then I might deal with it at that point.
Okay. All right. One of the interesting things, I had John Ledumas on our show maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, and one of the things that he had kind of talked about is OPA, other people's agenda. And he just said that, hey, in the morning, whenever he's doing his meditation, his exercise, those kind of things, and I don't remember the exact time, I think it's about 9 or 10 in the morning, but until 9 or 10 in the morning, he doesn't worry about other people's agenda. He just worries about JLD's agenda and puts everything off until that time comes, so that he's not thinking and processing through all this stuff that it's going to get handled at some point. Why, bog yourself down in the morning? And that's another one of those things where I'm not great at it. I've got it on the agenda, if you will, to slowly start taking some of those things off my schedule. And it's like a habit, like anything else. It's you want to see what's in your phone, or I do anyway. So it's kind of a tough deal. Well, as we get down, kind of winding down to the end of the show, talk about stuff that's fun. I know you mentioned, where you got married, but where's your favorite place to go vacation?
It's the place we got married, which is the Bahamas. And the reason is I'm on the East Coast. It's a quick jaunt down there. It's a beach environment. It's a relaxing, calming place, which is kind of ideal for me. That's what I want in a vacation. I don't want to be going. I think part of that is because growing up, my vacations with my father was very much going. So I now enjoy just kind of taking the time off. So we've been a lot of places in the Caribbean, but the Bahamas has been my favorite, just by the nature of the people that we've met and a lot of the fun we've had down there. So that is definitely our favorite place to go. We spend actually quite a bit of time getting back down to Texas to spend with family. And my family is mainly in Austin now. And then my wife, we've been together since high school. Her family is actually still down in the Rio Grande Valley. So we will go down there quite often. Okay.
All right. Very good. And if our listeners, if they wanted to engage with you, maybe they've got a question as it relates to IP, or maybe they've got a situation on their hands and they need to get in touch with you. What's the best way to communicate with you? Are you social? Are you out there on LinkedIn and Facebook and such? Where's the best way to get in touch with you?
So Facebook is the one social media that I'm on that is personal only. I just don't really use it for business, but I'm on Twitter at Bobby Klinck, and that's Klinck. I'm pretty active there in spreading information, not just about law, but about entrepreneurship and marketing and startups, et cetera. You can also, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me it's Robert Klinck. And then you can also go to my website, which is klinkllc.com. Again, that's Klinck and then llc.com. There's easy ways to contact me on there. But also I have actually a free e-course that people can sign up for. So it's at klinkllc.com /podcast. And if you go there, there's you can sign up for a 4-part email course about intellectual property planning if you're interested in that issue. And you'll get a series of emails where you get about a 10 or 15 minute video from me each day for 4 days. You'll also get a free copy of my book and then some other forms and checklists that you can use in the process. So those are the best ways for people to get in touch with me.
Okay, and give me that website again. It was Klinck LLC.
LLC, yeah. So limited liability company. So it's klinkllc.com. And then the special is then /podcast, and that's where you can get that free e-course.
We've got just maybe another minute left on the show, and so if you've got a link that says /podcast, I am assuming, and somehow I missed that in the research, you've got a podcast as well?
No, I use that just for folks who are, when I'm on a podcast or radio interview, I give that out for folks as a landing page to get to.
Makes perfect sense. Well, and I was thinking, man, how did I miss that if you got a podcast? So, no, that makes perfect sense. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to that as well. So it's klinkllc.com /podcast, and it'll have the offerings that you have for our listeners, and I appreciate you doing that for us. And as always, I want to thank you as a guest. I mean, it's you guys that make this possible, and there's always tons of golden nuggets. I'm scribble down notes every time of all the stuff that I learn, so thank you for your time, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And also we want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do it without them. Ambitious Radio is so excited about all things that are going on. Tune in Saturdays, and where we interview thought leaders and exciting entrepreneurs changing the faces of their organizations. Remember, you can make money or you can make excuses, but you cannot make both. So go out there and be ambitious.
Thank you for listening to the Ambitious Radio Network, hosted by serial entrepreneur Doug Parker. Join us weekly as we have engaging conversations with ambitious entrepreneurs and thought leaders on topics that can be applied immediately after listening. Like what you've heard? Listen to other interviews at ambitiousradio.com or subscribe on iTunes.